Welcome to episode 58 of In Touch with iOS, a podcast that talks about iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, Apple TV, and related technologies, plus tips, apps, and gear. I am your host, Dave Ginsburg, and my guest, again, this time around is Kelly Guimont from the Daily Observations podcast. How are you doing, Kelly?
I'm doing well, David. How are you?
Good. I think it's only been a couple weeks since you came back, since you've been on, so I figure we have such a great time. You're back again to talk about all there is to know about our fun stuff we know in the iPhone and everything else that's out there. So, but we have some good topics this week. Some news stories that we had talked about pre-show, and a few things that have happened this past week. And I thought this week we would have a topic on discussing buying an iPad. Last week I had Guy Searle on the show, and the both of us talked about what to do in buying an iPhone. It was a really good conversation. So I figured, what, I'll do the iPad this week, and talk about some other stuff. So let's just dive right into this stuff. And first news story that caught my eye was Apple outsells Samsung as iPhone tops U.S. mobile activations in the first quarter of 2019. And I can say there's no surprise to that. It's Samsung. Has an interesting different models that they're out there this time around. Honestly, the U.S. market is pretty solid with iPhone. Companies have anywhere between, there's some companies that have anywhere 70 and 80% of their phones are iPhones. So, and what do you think of this?
Well, I thought it was notable as a thing that, as a talking point, sort of, because it is sort of a landmark, that Apple's passing this number. But I think the thing that I am less interested in is the maker, and I'm more interested in the platform. Like, how does iOS stack up against Android? I know it's selling more than Samsung, but if you take Samsung and Motorola and Google and all the people that make Android phones, how many Android phones were activated last quarter and how many iOS devices were activated last quarter? That to me would be a more interesting number, and something a little more. I know why this number is interesting, obviously, because Samsung's sort of always been the Joker to the iPhone's Batman. But I feel like there's a better conversation to be had when it comes to choice of platform, because it used to be, initially when Android phones were first out, a lot of people went to them because like they'd had a BlackBerry and went, I need a physical keyboard. I can't type on that little baby glass screen. It won't work for me. So no. And so there were some people who made that decision, at the time. Well, on an iPhone, on an original iPhone, on an iPhone 3G, on a 3GS, like, it wasn't easy. To be fair, it was not.
It was tough.
I have wee little thumbs, and they were fine. So yeah, and it wasn't the easiest thing, but so some people were like, I have to have a physical keyboard because I came from BlackBerry, and other people, were like, I have a Windows machine, and right now the syncing situation on the Windows side really sucks, and you still had to plug it into something. And as those arguments have fallen away over time, as everybody gets used to typing on glass, as everybody gets used to over-the-air sync and over-the-air backups and not having to plug into a computer at all, or rarely, at most, it becomes a more interesting conversation. Like, how many people are just on Android because they've always been on Android? How many people switch back and forth depending on which phone has a better camera or the cooler new feature, depending what it is, whether it's like, I got an iPhone 10 because the Animoji was amazing, and now this time around I got the Pixel 2 that has the really awesome Childish Gambino dancing, like, Playmoji or whatever they're called, and all that kind of stuff, and making, some people like don't really have a particular loyalty. And I feel like that's more interesting of a conversation. Like, yeah, sales numbers are nice, but it is a landmark, but
you go towards the bottom of this article, they say, in the battle between iOS and Android, the data calculations is that Android makes 64% of all U.S. device activations in the quarter compared to iOS and 34%. So, goody. We're going to compare just Samsung, but you're right. It's just, there's so many other manufacturers out there besides Samsung that are out there with Android. So, I mean, Europe, it's still dominant Android. So, it really is. It isn't going to make a huge dent as far as these numbers go. So,
yeah,
you read these articles, yeah, okay. But,
yeah.
I mean,
because then there's the context of like, is it their first Android device? Is it the first iOS device? Is this the latest in a series? Like, I've never had anything but iOS, or I've never had anything but Android. Right. And like there's a little more to chew on when you have those kind of numbers and that kind of breakdown. So
yeah. Oh well, we'll rack it up to okay. And we talked to you just mentioned BlackBerry. The Verge had an interesting article called BlackBerry Messenger. Yes, that BBM is shutting down May 31st. A paid enterprise version will live on, but the old consumer version is going to go the waste.
Wow. End of an era. It's like, was it
era.
Last year sometime when AOL Instant Messenger went away?
Everybody was all crying about that. And
yeah, I don't know how many people are sad about this.
I don't think too many. It's a very short article. It just came out today, so I just happened to notice it before we came and started recording here. And BlackBerry just isn't. It's disappearing. Even the enterprise. I'm amazed that enterprise. There are still enterprise customers out there using all those services.
Yeah. Like, to me, that's the news, is that it's still alive and kicking somewhere. Like, this product isn't going away because we have enough people using it that,
enterprise, yeah. I mean, with the advent of all the MDMs that are out there, whether it be Jamf, whether it be Microsoft Intune, whether it be, people bringing their own devices. I mean, why would any enterprise want to be spending money on BlackBerry these days? It just doesn't make any sense at all. So, that's all we have to say about that.
Well, and I remember that was another, talking about like people choosing Android or iPhone, Android OS or iOS. Like, that was the thing other people were talking about too, was like, there's an Android version of BlackBerry Messenger and there's not an iOS version of BlackBerry Messenger. So I have to get an Android phone. And, even that, like, I remember, I don't know what they did, but I remember back on the 2 Talkcast, I had Jim Dalrymple on and we were going to say something. And I said, so one of the things that came out this week was BlackBerry something, whatever. Yeah. And he just laughed.
Black what?
Whenever I hear BlackBerry, that in the back of my head, I just hear Jim Dalrymple chuckling because he was really entertained by it. So it is kind of the end of an era though, like when you think about it, because remember, like that was like the monolithic device when Apple announced the iPhone in 2007, was how do they think they're going to compete against BlackBerry with this thing?
Right. But I mean, that's why we're here talking about iOS right now. I mean, why this podcast exists is because it's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone. So this story was pretty big today, actually yesterday, when we record this, and it's on The Verge. It's 5 big questions about Apple and Qualcomm's surprise settlement. I was pretty surprised myself that they settled. There was going to be quite a battle, but they reached an agreement in principle that they put down their gloves and they're gonna love each other.
Nice.
So
yeah.
But for the first question was, why did they choose to settle? I mean, I don't know why. It was just why they decided to settle, but but I think they had been looking for a resolution for quite a few months as far as that.
Well, I think there's something circular happening here, because there's a second piece of news that goes with this, goes hand in hand with this one, and it's that Intel decided to nope out hard on modem manufacturing, and I think and like those 2 pieces of information came out real close to the same time, and so like it was all the same day, and I think I saw at least one person characterize it as within hours of each other. Right. So I wonder, there are a number of ways it could have gone down, but it feels like the way that it went down was, either Apple talked to Intel and Intel was like, look, here's the real story with the manufacturing we're doing now. And so Apple was like, well, we don't have another option. So what are we going to do? I guess we're going to have to play nice with Qualcomm. And, there is something in there about an undisclosed amount of money that Apple's paying, like, in addition. But I think, and then there's the other piece of it where, maybe Apple had to make some sort of decision with Qualcomm. And then once it turned out they were going to settle with Qualcomm, they probably called Intel and they were like, hey, we thought, I thought you should hear it from me.
Right.
And that was the thing that triggered, like, either way, like, those two stories are very, very related. Whatever the sequence of events was, those two stories are very related to each other. And I think that whatever the order of things happening was, like, the impact was, the impact of one is what drove the other. Right. They absolutely go together. It's a set.
And then throughout the article, I'm not going to go through every single bit of it, but they're asking when the first 5G iPhone is going to come out. Hard to say. I mean, when the chips come out, they will. I don't know if it'll necessarily be in 2019. I mean, the T-Mobile Sprint merger is, I guess, a little bit in jeopardy too. I don't know where that's going to be. I mean, that's going to have a lot of effect on the 5G services. But as they said, I don't think there's going to be a 5G iPhone anytime soon. We'll see where they're at. When they talk about the new phones come out in the fall. And then they ask, will Apple actually build their own 5G modems? Interesting tweets. Benjamin Bajarman tweeted, said, don't be surprised that Apple may buy some, if not all, of Intel's modem IP business. Yeah, well, Apple's got some money to be buying this kind of thing, so I wouldn't be either.
Yeah. I absolutely think Apple's going to make their own modems. I was honestly surprised it was a 6-year agreement for that reason.
Yeah, so, but I think that's why, because they want to be able to make their own chips, but still be in harmony. Well,
we talked about it on daily observations, and one of the things that I brought up was I wouldn't be surprised if Apple had built some sort of out into that agreement 2 or 3 years in or something, so that they could make their own. And if they got to a point where they were making their own and could do it at scale, then they would bail on it. But part of what Qualcomm gets out of all of this, I think, is they don't have to have a big antitrust lawsuit, because anything that comes out in this antitrust lawsuit is going to really not look good for them when they have to argue the same stuff in like Asia and Europe. And I think it would have been a really bad scene for them, which is why it made sense for them to get out of this. Yeah. So that's that. Again, as a spectator, like, I don't have all the information on all of that stuff. That's what it sounds like. Just
thought interesting discussion about where it's going to go. It'll continue to evolve. And then next article was about, and you talked about today during the Daily Observations podcast. T-Mobile is working with Apple working with them to do Robo-Calling technology called Stir Shaken. I know you guys talked about it at great length this afternoon. It looks like right now it's only on Android, but they're talking about bringing it to iPhone. John Legere is the CEO of T-Mobile. I know he's such a big advocate of this and 5G for that matter. He made his comments about it's an industry-wide problem, and it is. I mean, what did you guys quote as, like, something like 23 billion robocalls occurred last year? I was getting them at work today. I was like, are you kidding me? I think I got 2 of them today alone, and then one of them, of course, was AT&T's trying to sell me their direct TV service. It's like, excuse me, I answered it because I'm at work. I mean, of course, I don't know who's calling. I said, this is a business. Then they said my name, so they must have had my work number. And I'm like, well, take my number off your list, because this is a business. Oh, I'm sorry to disturb you. I'm like, give me a break. But this should be an interesting thing to see if this really makes a big difference. I mean, I know you guys talked a lot about the other services. We won't go too into that, but there are, and I've talked about this before with the different apps that are out there. There's so many different services that can block them, but they're not foolproof. But
nothing is.
Yeah, this is great to see it. See a carrier like T-Mobile, and I keep saying it every time I talk about it. I'm very proud to be a T-Mobile customer. They've been very good at doing good things. I don't hear about AT&T doing these kind of things. And so
at least, like, one thing we did mention this morning is that all of the carriers have committed to this on some sort of rollout schedule. This T-Mobile is just the first to start getting it out the door. Yeah. And basically what we're talking about with Stir Shaken is it's this sort of handshake that kind of verifies that you are calling from the number that you say you're calling from, so that at least it's partially legitimate. This should help crack down on, I think they call them the neighborhood scams, where it looks like it's a phone number that's in your area or, near you, so that you're more likely to pick it up. And this helps keep that from happening.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see how well it's going to work initially, at least, and then as it gets more adoption, I'm really excited to find out how it's going to help with the other stuff with other carriers.
I'm going to be super excited to see where
where
it all goes, because it's something that's got to be taken care of. It's just crazy how many robocalls we get.
Yes.
Daily. You said you got some while you were on recording your show too. I mean,
as we were recording, my phone started going. Yeah, my phone rang.
Just crazy. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I didn't mention this last week. I want to mention it again. It hasn't actually been released yet, but my shout out again to my friends at iPhone Life magazine. I have a article that's going to be in the next issue coming up. I believe it's going to come out on the web. If you're a subscriber, this weekend. It's the 6 best podcasting apps that I wrote up, and it was a great fun thing to write up, and I want to make sure I share that with everybody. And it's a lot of fun stuff to do, and that's a great magazine. It's a shame it's the way magazines have gone. They still are a print magazine that they only publish quarterly now. So. But it's a lot. But they pack their issues with some great information. Shout out again to Donna Cleveland, the editor-in-chief, for giving me an opportunity, as well as she was on the show a little while ago, and we did a show. So, but yeah, that's all that there is about that. So,
well, but it's pretty exciting to have your name in a magazine.
Oh yeah, it is, especially for the first time.
Yeah,
I'm catching up with all you guys because
well, as internet and webified and digital as everything is, and how you live your whole life on a screen like this and all of that, like having the opportunity to get something printed. Like I wrote some stuff for Mac Life back in the day. And having the opportunity to know that it's just, out there on a shelf somewhere, like actual paper, and somebody can pick it up and read it. Like that was still really exciting for me too. So I know, like it was, for me, it was totally a thrill. And then like my mom, of course, went down to the grocery store and had to buy one. And, so yeah, it's really exciting.
I'll have to go to the too and take a picture of it on the newsstand. So it's like,
yes.
Look at this. Oh, anyway, it's fun. So I'll let the listeners know when it is out on this newsstands, and you can go grab a copy and read it, as well as it'll be linked on the internet at the point as well. So let's move on. And one of the topics I wanted to talk about today was last week I talked about buying an iPhone. That's always I always get asked that question all the time. What iPhone would you get? What phone would you go with? And I'm sure you do as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to bring again this week. Let's talk about the same thing, but with iPad. A lot of people are buying iPads nowadays. There's so many choices, as we've talked about in the past year with all the new releases of all the new models. You now have there's 5 different models to choose from, versus before where you only had I think 3 or 4, 3 really, if you would have counted them, because the iPad Mini wasn't worth
it was really
money until
2.5 for a couple of years.
So little history, and I've said this before. I mean, I've had the iPad since the beginning, and I'm sure you have too. I had the first gen iPad. I was excited when that thing came out in 2010. God, it's been 9 years. I can't believe it.
I know.
Since the iPad came out, so I pretty much owned every iPad since then. I did, I was a little more reasonable when the Air 2. I went Air 2. I did that, but then I didn't do the 3rd gen. So I went right to the Air, and then the 9.7 inch came out. Then the 10.5 inch iPad Pro. I had that, and then got the 11 inch iPad Pro, and you and I were on the show. Yeah, when I first got it, we were talking about that. So, but now Apple got smart, and they added 2 new models besides the low end model. That's the iPad Air. Yeah, the iPad Air. Oh, okay.
Resurrected. Yes,
it's resurrected. In fact, I have an iPad Air sitting on my desk here. That's the old iPad Air, and go look at how much it costs now compared to
I know.
I'm gonna go try to sell that thing, so I'll be lucky I got $150 for it. So, but it's got the cellular too. But so who cares? They don't care about that. That's why it's not worth buying the cellular. That extra money you buy. I'll talk about that. And then, of course, they have the 6th gen iPad, which is a perfectly great iPad, and I've talked about this before. And then it's exciting. I think the iPad Mini, the 5th gen, they finally came up with a great upgrade. It hadn't been touched in like 4 years.
4 years.
It was almost 4 years to have a product sitting on their product line. That's unusual for Apple to do that. I mean,
well, not anymore.
Not anymore because the iPhone they do too. We talked last week. Yeah. So.
Well, no, like the Mini sat for 3-4 years. The iMac is on year 3 or 4. So yeah, but it's mobile tech, and mobile tech doesn't. Except for the Mini, they don't tend to let mobile technology languish like that. So.
Right. So
I was really excited to see it. I would have been even more excited to see it last year or the year before.
Exactly.
But I'm really glad it's back. And the cool thing about the Mini now is that it takes the pencil.
Yes, they all take the pencil now, which is even more awesome. So let's hit on to the top. I'll go start at the top and work my way all the way down to the bottom.
Okay.
Really, the first question a lot of people ask is, can you use your iPad as a main computer? I think you could. I mean, I talked about this a long time ago. Gosh, 4 years ago at MacStock when I did a presentation. Could this be your full-time computer? Mm-hmm. And of course, me as a sick person I am had the 12.9 inch and the 10.5 inch in both hands and doing a demonstration. Well, I since sold the 12.9. 12.9 inch. I don't have that anymore, but the 12.9 inch model, current model out right now is it's in its 3rd generation now. So it is the A12X Bionic chip. Both that iPad Pro and the 11 inch iPad Pro, which I have the 11 inch, are both the high end chips. So now you really have to decide because they're expensive. I mean, the pricing between the models are on upwards of $1,000 plus. So yeah, is that the question should be asked? Could this be your full time computer? I think it could to a point. I think
it depends on your use. Like and that doesn't mean that it couldn't be, but I think there's a certain amount, I say this all the time, there's a certain amount of technological honesty. If what you really do with your computer most of the time is some Facebook and looking at some stuff on the web and you're checking your email, maybe you do some banking online, and that's through a web page or something like that. You absolutely could upgrade that 6, 8, 10-year-old computer that sits in the kitchen that nobody uses because it's so old, and you could get an iPad instead. And it could be, and if that's your actual usage, then you're probably in good shape. Like that will totally work for you, and it will give you the bonus of you can get text messages on it and read them a little better. It's a little bigger screen, you get a little nicer text, all that kind of stuff that goes with it. The bonus of anything that you do on your phone, you can do with a little more acreage if you have a larger, iPad. Really, I would not recommend the Pro as a primary computer to anybody unless they had a specific need, that kind of horsepower or anything. And the reason for that is because it's going to have the same lifespan that the others are. After 4 years or 5 years, you're still going to have to get a new one in order for the newest operating system to work on it. So unless you have a specific need for that level of, like, maybe you do audio processing or video editing or something like that mobily, and you have a need for a really high-powered mobile device, because there's the other little things that go along with buying an iPad Pro. Like, it may be the only USB-C thing that you own, and so charging it is going to be a completely different thing, and you're going to have to buy a couple extra cables, so you've got one in your backpack or one upstairs and downstairs or whatever, and all of that stuff goes into that decision as well. Or an adapter. Like, you can hook a lot of stuff up to it, but only if you have a thing, and every one of those things from Apple is $29 a whack and whatever else. So
and that's the thing. The Pro line series are the USB-C, so it's a different connector from your iPhone. They both have true depth cameras. Who takes pictures with their iPad? A lot. I mean, a fair amount of people do, but it does look kind of goofy.
Yeah.
Hey, look at me, hey. But hey,
especially because next year when you get a new iPhone, that's going to be the better camera.
Right, exactly. Which a 10s Max, which I have, probably has a better camera.
Yeah.
But those Pro models both do the 4K video. They have a true depth 7 megapixel camera, and does Face ID. So that's the one thing that these two models have versus the rest of the line. They don't have a home button. They have Face ID. So that's something to get used to as well. But if you have a 10 or a 10S or a 10S Max or a 10R, then you're used to Face ID already. So you shouldn't have to worry about it too much. Both these models support only the Apple Pencil 2nd generation, and they also have the Smart Keyboard Folio, which of course I have both. So that's really, when you think about it, it's got a lot of those things that are going to give you some support. The pencil in itself, we'll talk about that in a minute. I just want to I'll hit all the lines, and then we can hit with what the pencil choices are. But then if you move on down the line, a nice sweet spot is the iPad Air. Now, the iPad Air is a 10.5 inch screen, and it's got the A12 Bionic chip, which is just slightly slower. So really, if you think about the price of the iPad, it's a nice sweet spot that has plenty of features that you need. It does do Touch ID. It does have now it's only 2-speaker audio versus the 4-speaker. So if you're really thinking you really want to have some good sound, you might notice a little difference when it comes to that. Now, the rest of the models, as I go down here, is they do support the Apple Pencil, the 1st generation Apple Pencil, which, you know what, I wasn't really super thrilled with the design of the 1st gen. I mean, the fact you have to pull a cap off and have that lightning connector and to charge it, and look so dorky when you have to plug it in. Luckily, it does come up with a small adapter where you can plug it into a lightning cable if you wanted to charge it away from the iPad.
They're also compatible with the Logitech Crayon.
And I was going to hit, and that's why I was going to hit. Yeah.
The thing.
Go ahead.
Well, it's more. This sounds weird, but the Crayon is very pencil shaped. It's got sides, as opposed to the pencil, which is completely round like a crayon. Because that's not confusing.
Yeah. No.
But like, I know people who really prefer the Crayon, partly because it's less money, and partly because it's got the sides, and partly because it's a little bigger than the pencil, so it's a little more comfortable to hold as you're doing whatever you're doing with the pencil. So if that's a consideration, if one of the things that you're looking at is artwork or handwriting or whatever it is you want to do that may require some sort of input like that, the pencil for a lot of people is fine, but for a lot of people, the Crayon is a more attractive option for one of those other reasons.
Yep. So it's a good sweet spot if you're looking to get a decent iPad and not spending the big money on the Pro line series. Excellent choice.
If I was buying one today, that's what I would buy, is the brand new. That's what
I think a lot of people would. I'm going to skip the 6th gen because it's kind of the lowest end, but I'm going to kind of move right over to the iPad mini. That's really should be in the order of the line, other than the size of the screen. The iPad mini is a 5th gen. It's a full iPad experience, but it fits in one hand, and then it's like you really could think about it as being an oversized iPhone. Really, if you, I
was going to say it's an iPhone SE, or the iPad SE is what it is, like, because it's got all of the. Yeah, because it's got all of the Air specs in a mini case, if I'm not mistaken. That was the chip that was in it, and I might be wrong about that. It might be the iPad in the mini case.
Yeah, because it's got an A12 Bionic chip.
So it's the Air,
chip.
which is 12.
It's the exact same chip as the Air, and just as a smaller size. So 7.9.
An iPad Air, iPad Air insides and iPad mini outsides. So, like. I want one of those. I'm not gonna lie. I have the 2017
as a second.
I have the 2017 Pro, iPad Pro, the 10.5, and I really like it. It's my favorite iPad that I've had. I had the original Air before that, and the Air was fine. It was a nice upgrade from whatever the iPad was I had before that. I did not have all of them, but it was really nice. It was a nice upgrade. I really like it. I like the pencil. I like the interaction. I like the speed. I liked the Touch ID, which I didn't have on my previous iPad. So all of those things were really great updates. I really like it, but man, there's just something about that mini that I just love. And I
agree. I
want new AirPods. So like my Apple hardware money is going to new headphones. It's not going to a new iPad. But
those Beats you might look at.
Oh no, I don't want the Beats. So
the new Beats.
I don't want the new Beats. It's a whole thing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. But The mini. So the mini is a nice little guy, and great for reading books and doing basic things with it, and not having the larger size if you want to have a mini size. So then I move right over to the bottom end of the model line, which is the 6th generation iPad, which they came out with last year. Yes, it's underpowered. It's only a 9.7-inch screen. It has an A10 Fusion chip. It has an 8-megapixel camera. Basic stuff, but for someone who just wants an entry level, and I've said this, I keep putting my tone of voice here every time I say this. You want an entry level iPad and don't have to spend so much money on it. I mean, these can be had on Amazon for $250 for a 32 gigabyte iPad. You want something simple like that. And we talked about this before with you needing iPads, but maybe for app camp for girls and some of these. I would not be at all surprised that all these schools that use iPads are going to be buying these.
Of course. And remember that this model made its debut last March at Apple's education event in Chicago. Yeah. So, it's not surprising at all. Where they did, in fact, name check App Camp for Girls. I promptly freaked out. Tim Cook said the words App Camp for Girls on stage where people could hear him. It was recorded. I have evidence. It was
go back and play it.
It was really exciting. But part of so I feel like that's why that exists. It's the eMac of the iPad model. If you need one, but there's also a lot of non-edu uses for it. If you have kids who, and you want to give them some well-supervised screen time or things like that. If you need a secondary device for whatever reason, that's a nice big screen mobile device, or maybe you have, not just younger people in your life, but maybe older people in your life. And this is a good computer upgrade for those people who have very, very lightweight needs when it comes to that kind of thing, but they still have a solid camera. So FaceTime is awesome, or Skype is awesome, or, whatever sort of video chat situation you have. You can send people pictures that they can look at and enjoy, and all that kind of stuff works really well on that device. And that device is a pretty lightweight way to get into that. And, if you need to manage it or whatever, then that comes out. It comes out to be really economical and a super great decision for a lot of those kind of things.
No, absolutely. So any other closing thoughts? I think that pretty much could round up a lot of what we talked about with iPad. I hope that it would help help the listeners in you making your informed decision on which iPad you really want to go with.
And the thing to consider is the accessories that go with some of that too. We talked about USB-C charging earlier. The keyboard situation, if you're a person who really has to, just like phones earlier, if you have to type on a physical keyboard, there are very easy ways to do that. And there's the Apple Smart Folio, which is an easy way. Yes. If you don't want to carry a keyboard around all the time, there are Bluetooth keyboards that make that an attractive option that you can carry around that are very inexpensive. So if you occasionally need to be able to type, you can just grab that and take it with you. And then the rest of the time, your iPad is lightweight, compact. The pencil is a thing to consider, what charging that looks like, or what the case situation is, if you want to make sure that it's protected because you drop it in your bag all the time or something. Right. If you're me, the case is almost as important as the iPad. I can't buy one until there's a case for it because I have to be able to drop it in my backpack and know it's going to be fine.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Those are things also to consider, but there's a lot of ways to turn one of these into your, depending on your needs, there are a lot of ways that this could really be an awesome computer upgrade for you.
Absolutely. Good points. So go out there, get yourself an iPad. If you already have an existing iPad, hopefully this gave you some insights of what to do with it as you continue on with its use. So I wanted to switching topics here. I wanted to talk a little bit about Apple support. People talk about that too much. There aren't many ways you can get support from Apple, and of course, the most common way was to go on support.apple.com on their website. They had all kinds of support articles and they had troubleshooting tips and all that stuff. But this day and age, things are changing a little bit. Apple has kind of expanded its horizons. They recently came out with an app for the iPhone and the iPad. That is called Apple, ironically enough, Apple Support. What a surprise. And of course, the great thing about it is you have direct line to support right from the app. Now, a couple of cool things they just did. They just added some new things in here. They have a section there when you first launch the app called Discover. And while you're listening to this show, you want to hear some tips and all that stuff. Well, they also provide a lot of tips and different things, articles. So I'm looking at the Discover right now and talking about things like edit PDFs with the Books app, or organizing your data in new ways, using Siri shortcuts. I still need to do a Siri shortcuts discussion. I still have to learn a little more before I'm ready to talk about it. But so they have articles that are right in the Discover sections, and then also go below that, they have the choices of browsing the collection, including doing things like working and playing on your iPad, backing up your Mac if you use your Mac, all kinds of different things, and they have different collections, and you can go through that as well. Now, the second button in the app, it does say, give you a button, and of course, the app needs to be signed in with your Apple ID. When I tap Get Support, it lists every single device I own. So it's in fact, I didn't give my whole story about my iPad. Let me go back to that 1 second with support, because that was actually a good. It was actually a good experience. I'm on a plane. I'm flying to Vegas. I'm sitting in my seat. Of course, I have the keyboard, the smart folio keyboard, and like a dummy, I put it into the slot in the seat. And of course, I felt secure when it was in there until some moron decides, "Is that your seat?" And I said, "Yes." And of course, he was getting a little perturbed because his wife was sitting in the row over to me, thinking, "Well, you should move." I'm like, "No, I'm not moving. I have an aisle." So I'm not thinking, he bumps my iPad, and as he's getting into the seat on the plane, and of course it falls and hits the ground. I pick it up, and sure enough, it's got a big dent in the edge, and it's got a cracked screen. I'm very sad.
No.
So I was very sad. It was my iPad Pro 11. Oh my god! So this just tells you it's worth every penny to have Apple Care. So the light at the end of the tunnel here with this story. I get to Vegas, and of course, I got to go find an Apple store. So I did, and went to the store, and of course, I had to wait for an hour to get in there. So finally, they went in. I said, "Yeah, look what happened." And okay, $49. They replaced it, so I got a brand new one. So good. That just paid my Apple Care. It was paid off for itself. Other than I should have made that jerk pay for it, because he shouldn't have done that. But I didn't want to deal with it. So there's my story with support. With my iPad.
Yeah, I've used Apple support a few times. There's only, I know this is going to come as a shock to some people, but there's only so much that's within my troubleshooting powers to resolve myself. And I've had to take stuff in occasionally. And being able to at least sort of verify that, like, I've done everything that I'm supposed to do, or I've tried everything there is to try, that makes that app really useful to have. And it's also nice because it does take a little bit of the family support load off of me, because like they all have it installed now, so they can walk through and find, like, why does iTunes say this thing to me? Or because it's Apple support, you can look up Mac stuff on this app, so it totally works for that too. Why is iTunes giving me this error? What is this weird symbol in the menu bar on my phone? Right. In the status bar, like, what's that thing mean exactly? And having that resource that people who normally would call me are able to go use to ask those kinds of questions is also really helpful, because sometimes it puts them on the right track, and it gives them more information about what's happening. So then when they do have to call me, like, I went and looked in the app and it told me this and that and this and that. And so I'm calling you to find out what that means, or what that's for, or what it does, or, how it's going to impact me. So that's also been really nice to have for my own use anyway. At least I get better questions from people who are calling me from help.
So the good thing is, when you go into the Get Support list, it actually lists all your devices. And I look at my list. It's frightening that it's a long list, but that's me. But it also includes things like Apple ID, Apple Music, the iTunes Store, Apple Pay, iCloud, billing and subscriptions. And then it also gives more products and services. I haven't looked in that. I wonder if News Plus is listed in there. No, there's AirPods and a lot of other accessories. So it gives you suggestions of where to go and what to do when you actually tap your specific item. So like I say, I go into my iPhone, the first popular topic is repairs and physical damage. Well, that they're going to throw you right to say, make an appointment at the Apple store, or you have to send it in. Battery and charging, system performance, and other topics. those types of topics where something can be that someone could troubleshoot with you. The cool thing is that they'll actually have a tech connect to your phone using the app. I don't know if you've done it before, but so you go in and actually, let's say battery and charging, they'll start doing actual diagnostic tests to your phone right from the app. It's really cool. I mean, how could you just do that through your app without having to bring it in? And we're so used to all these years of your having any device, you'd have to, I guess I have to bring it in because it's broke. I mean, this applies to your iPhone, your iPad, your Apple Watch, your Apple TV, your HomePod. I mean, your Mac. Everything can be tested and with the app. So so we're really going to definitely have a great thing with the Apple app. So and then in closing, I just wanted to talk a little bit about we're going to have a link in the show notes, and the show notes will have a link to Apple's links to the YouTube videos. So they have some great videos on there too as well. So and that's about it as far as that goes. Let's just talk a couple tips here, and we're going to wrap things up here. One tip I found, actually, Andrew Orr over on your friend at the Mac Observer did an article about AQI, the air quality. That was pretty cool. I didn't even know that existed. So the air quality index is now on Apple Maps, so it'll show how the air quality is wherever you are. Funny
story. Neither did he, because he opened Maps to go look something up and asked the TMO Towers and said, "What does AQI stand for?" And somebody went, "What?" And he put up a screenshot of his map, and I said, "Oh, it's air quality index." And I said, "Yeah, if you tap on that, it will actually give you the extended forecast." And he went, "Oh, that's cool." I went, "Yeah." So it leads to a larger conversation about discovering cool stuff in iOS, but that's why it got written up, because I'll have the link in the show notes for that tip. And with that, let me real quickly mention Macstock. Are you coming to Macstock this year? Are you working on it, or are you going to be there? I am working on it.
We're going to make sure you're there.
Process. Oh, I know.
Good. So make sure you go into Macstock, check it out. It's a great conference. I won't spend a lot of time on it. I've talked about it quite a bit. Mike Potter was on the show a couple weeks ago. In fact, I was with Mike last week. We went to an Apple user group up in Milwaukee, and had a good time. So you definitely want to check out Macstock this year. Go to macstock2019.com. Link is in the show notes. And I'll be speaking for a fifth year, which I'm excited about. And if any of you are listening and you hear this and you want to get a discount off of our already low price, early bird price, you get $10 off using the offer code INTOUCH, and you can buy your the tickets right from the link in our show notes. So please check out Macstock. With that, Kelly, we'll wrap this up. I know.
All right.
We want to get things going here. So let's. That is a wrap for this week. Please send in your comments, questions, and suggestions to our email address at feedback@intouchwithios.com. You can follow us on Twitter @intouchwithios. You can subscribe in your favorite podcatcher, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, and TuneIn Radio. Or better yet, go to our website at intouchwithios.com. where all the links to all the places you can listen are there. I am Dave Ginsburg, and you can find me on Twitter @DaveG65. And thanks, Kelly, for being here.
Of course. It was really fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
A lot of fun, and thanks for listening, and we will talk to you soon.